The call came on a Tuesday morning, the kind of gray February day where the sky hangs so low you feel like you could reach up and touch it. I was in my office in Boston, reviewing blueprints for a renovation project, when my phone buzzed with a number I did not recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I wish I had, in some ways, because answering that call meant stepping back into a world I had spent 7 years carefully extracting myself from. "Is this Eleanor Hartwell?" The voice was formal, professional, the kind of tone that immediately tells you something is wrong. "Yes, this is she. I'm calling from Massachusetts General Hospital. I'm sorry to inform you that your father, Richard Hartwell, was brought in this morning. He suffered a massive cardiac arrest. I'm very sorry, Ms. Hartwell, but he didn't make it." I remember the silence that followed, the way the blueprints in front of me suddenly seemed like meaningless lines and shapes. My father was dead. Richard Hartwell, the man who taught me to ride a bicycle, who stayed up late helping me with calculus, who walked me down the aisle at my wedding and cried quietly into his handkerchief, was gone. But even in that moment of shock and grief, another feeling crept in, cold and unwelcome. I would have to see her again. Vanessa, my stepmother, the woman who had systematically dismantled my relationship with my father over the past 7 years, who had turned family dinners into battlegrounds and phone calls into interrogations, the woman who, I would soon discover, had been working towards something far more sinister than I ever imagined. I should tell you about my family before everything changed, before Vanessa entered our lives like a storm nobody saw coming. My mother, Catherine, died when I was 23. Breast cancer. It was brutal and fast, taking her from diagnosis to funeral in 8 months. My father was devastated. They had been married for 30 years, and he loved her with a quiet, steady devotion that I always admired. He was a professor of English literature at Boston University, a man who found comfort in books and words and the structured rhythm of academic life. After my mother died, he retreated into himself, spending long hours in his study, surrounded by her photographs and the leather-bound journals he had kept throughout their marriage. My brother Tommy and I worried about him. Tommy was only 18 when our mother died, still living at home and finishing high school. I was already out on my own, working my first job at an architecture firm in the city. We took turns checking on our father, making sure he ate, making sure he left the house occasionally. For 2 years, he existed in a kind of suspended grief, going through the motions of life without really living. Then Vanessa appeared. She was introduced to my father at a faculty dinner, brought by a colleague who thought Richard could use some companionship. Vanessa was charming, attentive, and beautiful in that polished way that suggested careful maintenance and expensive products. She laughed at my father's jokes, asked about his research, and seemed genuinely interested in his work. Within 3 months, they were dating. Within a year, they were married. I wanted to be happy for him. I really did. He smiled again, for the first time since my mother's death. He started hosting dinner parties, traveling, engaging with life in a way I had feared he never would again. But something about Vanessa never sat right with me. It was nothing I could articulate at first, just a feeling, a sense that her warmth was calculated, her interest performative. She asked too many questions about the house, about my father's investments, about the family property in Maine that had been in the Hartwell name for 4 generations. The first real conflict came 6 months after the wedding, when I visited for Thanksgiving. I had brought a box of my mother's things that I had been storing at my apartment, items my father had asked me to return to the house. Photo albums, her wedding dress, a collection of antique jewelry that had belonged to her grandmother. When I arrived, Vanessa greeted me at the door with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Oh, what's all this?" she asked, looking at the box in my arms. "Just some of Mom's things. Dad asked me to bring them back." Her expression flickered, just for a moment, before the smile returned. "How thoughtful. I'll take those. We're reorganizing the attic, and I want to make sure everything is stored properly." I held on to the box. I'd rather give them to Dad directly. That was the first time I saw the mask slip. Her eyes hardened, and her voice dropped half an octave. "Eleanor, I'm his wife now. You can trust me with a few old photographs." I did not give her the box. I found my father in his study and handed it to him personally, watching as he opened it with trembling hands, tears sliding down his cheeks as he touched my mother's wedding dress. Vanessa watched from the doorway, and when I caught her eye, I saw something that chilled me to my core. Hatred. Pure, undisguised hatred. From that moment on, the battle lines were drawn. Over the next few years, Vanessa worked methodically to isolate my father from his past. She redecorated the house, removing all traces of my mother's taste and replacing them with her own cold, modern aesthetic. She convinced my father to sell the antique furniture my mother had collected, claiming it was too dated, too depressing. She reorganized his study, boxing up decades of correspondence and photographs in the name of creating a more efficient workspace. Each time I visited, something else was gone. A painting my mother had loved. A collection of first edition books they had purchased together on their honeymoon in London. The china set that had been in my mother's family for generations. When I confronted my father about it, he seemed confused, almost dazed. "Vanessa says we need to look forward, not backward," he would say, repeating her words like a mantra. "She says holding on to the past is what's making me depressed." "You're not depressed, Dad. You're grieving. There's a difference." But he would just shake his head and change the subject, and I would drive back to Boston feeling like I was losing him by inches. The final break came when I was 31. My father called to tell me that he was selling the main property, the family cabin on the lake where I had spent every summer of my childhood, where my parents had fallen in love, where my mother's ashes were scattered beneath the old oak tree on the western shore. "You can't," I said, my voice breaking. "Dad, Mom is there. Her ashes are there." There was a long pause on the line, and when he spoke again, his voice was uncertain, wavering. "Vanessa says the upkeep is too expensive. She says we need to simplify our lives." "This isn't about simplifying. This is about erasing her. Can't you see what she's doing?" Another pause. Then, quietly, "I think you should stop calling for a while, Eleanor. You're upsetting Vanessa, and when she's upset, it affects my health. You understand?" Those words broke something in me. My father, the man who had always chosen me, who had always put his children first, was choosing her. I told him I loved him. I told him I would be there whenever he was ready. And then I did not speak to him for 3 years. I am not proud of that silence. It haunts me to this day, knowing how much time I lost, how many conversations we never had. But I was hurt, and I was angry, and I did not know how to fight an enemy I could not see. Vanessa had positioned herself so perfectly that any objection I raised made me look like the bitter daughter who could not accept her father's new wife. She had painted me as jealous, as unstable, as someone who could not let go of the past. And my father, worn down by grief and age and Vanessa's constant manipulation, believed her. It was Tommy who reached out to me 3 years into my exile from the family. He called me late one night, his voice slurred with alcohol and thick with tears. "Ellie, something's wrong. Something's really wrong." I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. "What is it? Is Dad okay?" "I don't know. He's different, confused all the time. He forgot my name yesterday, Ellie, called me by Uncle Robert's name. Uncle Robert's been dead for 15 years. Has he seen a doctor?" "Vanessa won't let him. Says it's just normal aging that we're overreacting. But I found him wandering in the garden at 3 in the morning last week. He didn't know where he was. He asked me where Mom was, if she was making breakfast." My blood ran cold. "Tommy, you need to get him to a doctor, with or without Vanessa's permission." "I can't. She controls everything, the money, the calendar, who comes to the house. I'm only here because I can't afford to live anywhere else, and she never lets me forget it. She looks at me like I'm a pest she's tolerating." I made a decision in that moment that would change everything. I started planning. I could not storm into the house and demand my father be examined. Vanessa would have me removed, probably call the police, claim I was harassing her. I needed to be smart. I needed to be patient. and I needed evidence. I started by hiring Marcus Webb, my best friend from college who had become a private investigator after leaving the police force. Marcus was good at his job, discreet and thorough, and he owed me a favor from when I had designed the renovation of his grandmother's house for cost. I told him everything, every suspicion, every strange behavior, every instance of Vanessa's control over my father. He listened without judgment and promised to look into her background. 2 weeks later, he called me with the first piece of the puzzle. Vanessa Cole, now Vanessa Hartwell, has been married twice before, he said. Her first husband died of heart failure at 62. Natural causes according to the death certificate. Her second husband divorced her after 3 years, citing irreconcilable differences. He died 2 years after the divorce in a car accident. Left no children, no significant estate at the time of death because, according to the divorce settlement, Vanessa got the house, the investment portfolio, and about 70% of his liquid assets. So she's a gold digger, I said. That's not illegal. No, but here's where it gets interesting. The first husband had 2 children from a previous marriage. After his death, there was a legal battle over the estate. Vanessa claimed he had rewritten his will 3 months before he died, leaving everything to her. The children contested it, said their father would never have done that, but they lost. The signature was verified, the will was upheld, and Vanessa walked away with a house worth $2 million and an investment account worth another $1 million. I felt sick. You think she forged the will? I think it's a hell of a coincidence. And I think your father, with his property in Maine, his tenured pension, his house in Newton, and whatever else he's managed to accumulate over 40 years of careful living, represents a very attractive target for someone with Vanessa's history. That was when I knew. I did not just suspect anymore. I knew, deep in my gut, that Vanessa was planning to take everything. And I knew that when my father died, whether naturally or otherwise, I would have no way to prove it unless I started gathering evidence now. For the next 4 years, I watched. I gathered. I waited. I reconciled with my father, slowly and carefully, approaching it like a diplomatic mission rather than a family reunion. I apologized for my years of silence, telling him I had been working through my own grief, that I was ready to accept his choices and support his happiness. Vanessa was suspicious at first, watching me like a hawk whenever I visited, but I played my role perfectly. I complimented her redecorating. I praised her cooking. I asked about her life, her friends, her hobbies, and pretended to care about her answers. Slowly, she began to relax, to see me as neutralized, no longer a threat. But every visit, I watched. I noticed the way she controlled my father's medication, doling out his pills herself and refusing to let anyone else near them. I noticed the way she isolated him from old friends, claiming they were bad for his health or that they upset him too much. I noticed the way his cognitive decline seemed to accelerate whenever I was not there, only to stabilize when I visited and ensured he was eating properly and engaging in conversation. I started documenting everything. I took photographs of his medication bottles, noting the doses and refill dates. I recorded our conversations on my phone, capturing his moments of lucidity and his moments of confusion. I requested copies of his medical records, claiming I needed them for a family health history, and discovered that he had not been to a doctor in over a year, despite Vanessa's insistence that he was receiving regular care. And then I found the diaries. It happened by accident. I was visiting one weekend when Vanessa was out at a charity luncheon, one of the social events she loved because they allowed her to perform generosity without actually being generous. Tommy was napping, and my father was in one of his confused phases, asking me repeatedly if I had seen his glasses when they were perched on top of his head. I helped him to bed, and then, on an impulse, went up to the attic to see what remained of my mother's things. The attic was dusty and cluttered, filled with boxes that Vanessa had deemed too unimportant to throw away, but too personal to keep in the main house. Most of them were filled with old tax returns, university correspondence, and academic journals my father had published in decades ago. But in the far corner, hidden behind a broken armchair and a stack of moth-eaten curtains, I found a trunk I recognized. It was my father's trunk, the one he had brought with him to college as a young man, the one he had kept in his study for as long as I could remember. The brass latches were tarnished, and the leather was cracked with age, but when I opened it, I found exactly what I had hoped for. Journals. Dozens of them, leather-bound and carefully labeled with dates, spanning from my father's college years to just a few months before my mother's death. My father had always been a journal keeper. It was one of the things my mother loved most about him, his dedication to recording his thoughts and experiences, creating a written record of his life. When Vanessa reorganized his study, he must have hidden these here, protecting them from her systematic erasure of his past. I could not take them all. Vanessa would notice if the trunk disappeared. But I took photographs of every page, spending 3 hours in that dusty attic, my phone battery draining as I documented 30 years of my father's inner life. What I found in those journals would become my weapon, my ammunition, my path to justice. The entries from my childhood were beautiful, filled with my father's observations about me and Tommy, his love for my mother, his struggles and triumphs as a professor. But the entries from after my mother's death told a different story. A story of manipulation, of isolation, of a man slowly realizing he had made a terrible mistake. One entry, dated 2 years after Vanessa entered his life, read, "She asked me again about the will today, wanted to know if Eleanor and Thomas are named as beneficiaries. I told her of course they are. They're my children. She did not seem pleased. I'm beginning to wonder if her interest in my legacy planning is really about planning at all, or if she's simply counting the days until I'm gone." Another, from a year later. "I cannot find my journals. Vanessa says she hasn't seen them, but I know she's lying. I caught her going through my desk last week, and when I asked what she was looking for, she claimed she needed a stamp. My stamps are in the kitchen drawer. She knows that. Everyone knows that. What was she really looking for?" And another, this one making my blood run cold. Dr. Patterson retired. Vanessa has found a new doctor for me, someone she says comes highly recommended. But I've never met him. Vanessa picks up my prescriptions and brings them to me, and I've noticed that the pills look different from what I remember taking before. I tried to call my old pharmacist to ask about it, but Vanessa had already changed my phone plan, removed the long-distance capability. She says it's too expensive. I'm beginning to feel like a prisoner in my own home. The most damning entry was dated just 6 months before my mother's death, before Vanessa, before everything changed. It was addressed to me and Tommy, written in my father's steady hand. "My dearest children, if you ever read this, know that I have always loved you more than anything in this world. Your mother and I have worked hard to build a life for you, to leave you something of value, not just money, but history, legacy, a sense of where you come from. The main property is yours by birthright. The house in Newton should pass to you both equally. The investments, the pension, everything we have, it belongs to you. No matter what documents might exist, no matter what anyone tells you, remember this. My final wishes are recorded here, in my own hand, witnessed by my own heart. I would never abandon you. I would never leave you with nothing. If that ever seems to happen, know that something has gone terribly wrong." I sat in that attic and cried, my tears dripping onto the dusty floorboards, because I understood what my father had known for years. He was trapped. He had married a predator, and by the time he realized it, he was too old, too isolated, and too confused to escape. And now he was dead, and I was standing in a funeral home in Newton, listening to Vanessa weep over his closed casket and pretending I believed a single tear was real. The funeral was a spectacle. Vanessa had spared no expense, which was ironic given how carefully she had controlled every other penny my father spent in recent years. She had chosen the most expensive casket, the most elaborate flower arrangements, the most prestigious reception venue. She stood at the entrance in a black designer dress, accepting condolences with the practiced grace of someone who had performed grief before. I stood beside Tommy, both of us silent and shell-shocked. He had aged 10 years since our last conversation. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, and his hands trembled slightly whenever he thought no one was watching. "Did you know?" I whispered to him during the service, when Vanessa was occupied greeting a group of faculty members. "Know what?" "About the diaries. About what he wrote." Tommy looked at me with confusion. "What diaries? Vanessa said he stopped keeping them years ago." Of course she did. Of course she had hidden them, tried to destroy them, not realizing that my father had hidden his own copies, had found a way to preserve his truth even as she erased everything else. I did not tell Tommy about the diaries then. I did not trust that he could keep a secret, not with Vanessa watching his every move. Instead, I squeezed his hand and promised we would talk soon, that things were about to change. The reading of the will was scheduled for 3 days after the funeral. Vanessa had arranged it with unseemly haste, claiming she needed closure, needed to understand what came next so she could properly grieve. The attorney was someone I had never met, a man named Gerald Whitman from a firm I had never heard of. Marcus did some digging and discovered that Whitman had only passed the bar 6 years ago and had a reputation for taking clients who needed documents that might not hold up under careful scrutiny. We gathered in the living room of the Newton house, Vanessa in my mother's old wingback chair, which she had reupholstered in cold gray leather. Tommy sat on the couch, looking like he might vomit. I sat opposite Vanessa, maintaining eye contact, refusing to look away first. Gerald Whitman was a nervous man with a receding hairline and sweat stains under his arms despite the cool February air. He fumbled with his briefcase, dropping papers twice before managing to extract the document he was looking for. "This is the last will and testament of Richard Allen Hartwell," he began, his voice cracking slightly. "Dated October 15th of last year." I felt a jolt of electricity run through me. October 15th. That was 4 months ago. My father had been deep in cognitive decline by then, barely able to remember what day it was, much less understand the implications of signing a new will. Whitman read through the preliminary sections, the standard legal language about sound mind and body, and then reached the bequests. "To my beloved wife, Vanessa Hartwell, I leave the entirety of my estate, including but not limited to the property at 47 Maple Lane, Newton, Massachusetts, the property at 892 Lakeside Drive, Camden, Maine, all investment accounts held in my name, all pension benefits, and all personal effects not otherwise specified." I watched Vanessa's face as the words were read. She was trying to look somber, trying to perform appropriate grief, but I caught the flash of triumph in her eyes, the slight curl at the corner of her lips. She had won. That's what she thought. She had won everything. Whitman continued. "To my daughter, Eleanor Catherine Hartwell, I leave my collection of academic texts to be distributed as she sees fit. To my son, Thomas Richard Hartwell, I leave my wristwatch, which belonged to his grandfather. That was it. Everything our parents had built over 40 years of marriage, everything our mother had contributed through her own career as a nurse, everything our grandparents and great-grandparents had accumulated and preserved, gone. Left to a woman who had known my father for 7 years and loved him for none of them." Tommy made a sound like a wounded animal. Vanessa reached over and patted his hand with transparent insincerity. "I know it's not what you expected, dear, but your father wanted to make sure I was taken care of. I'm sure he would have wanted me to share with you both, and I fully intend to. Eventually." I said nothing. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, my expression neutral. Because I had spent 4 years preparing for exactly this moment, and I was not going to waste my advantage by reacting emotionally. "When was this will signed?" I asked, my voice calm. Whitman shuffled his papers. "As I said, October 15th. And who witnessed the signature?" He named 2 people I had never heard of, both of whom, Marcus later confirmed, were employees of Vanessa's former real estate agency, both of whom had received unexplained cash payments within a week of the will being signed. "I see," I said. And was my father examined by an independent physician before signing? Given his age and health, that would have been standard practice to confirm testamentary capacity. Whitman's face reddened. The witnesses confirmed he was of sound mind. The witnesses who were paid by the primary beneficiary? The room went silent. Vanessa's expression flickered from triumph to wariness, and I watched her recalculate, watched her realize that I was not the naive, emotional daughter she had expected. "What exactly are you implying, Eleanor?" Her voice was honey and poison, sweet with an edge of threat. "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking clarifying questions. Surely you understand why I might want to ensure that my father's final wishes were properly recorded, given the significant changes from his previous will." "What previous will?" I smiled. I had her. The will he signed 2 years ago, witnessed by his longtime attorney David Chen, in which he left the Newton property to Tommy, the main property to me, and a life estate in the Newton house to you, along with a generous monthly stipend from the investment accounts. That will. The one I have a certified copy of. The one that predates his cognitive decline. Vanessa's face went white. Whitman started gathering his papers with renewed urgency. Tommy stared at me like I had sprouted a second head. I stood, smoothing my skirt with deliberate calm. "I'll be contesting this will in probate court. I suggest you retain independent counsel, Vanessa, because I intend to introduce evidence of undue influence, lack of testamentary capacity, and possible fraud. And if you've destroyed any of my father's personal papers, journals, or correspondence in an attempt to hide your actions, I should let you know that I have copies. Quite extensive copies, actually." I walked out of that house with my head held high, leaving Vanessa sputtering behind me. It was the first real battle I had won, and I savored every second of it. But the war was just beginning. The months that followed were a masterclass in legal warfare. Vanessa hired a team of expensive attorneys, the kind who charge by the quarter hour and use words like vexatious and spurious to describe any challenge to their client's position. She filed motions to dismiss my contest, claiming I was a disgruntled family member seeking to exploit the legal system for personal gain. She gave interviews to local newspapers portraying herself as a grieving widow besieged by her ungrateful stepchildren. But I had something she did not. I had the truth. Marcus worked tirelessly, digging into Vanessa's past with the tenacity of a bloodhound. He found the children of her first husband, now adults in their 40s, who were more than willing to testify about their own legal battle over their father's estate. They described Vanessa in terms that matched my experience exactly: charming, manipulative, patient, and utterly ruthless. They told me about finding their father's medication changed without explanation, about his sudden confusion in the months before his death, about Vanessa's insistence that he was fine, just tired, just aging. Marcus also found the second husband. Not dead, as public records suggested, but very much alive and living under a different name in a small town in Vermont. He had faked his death to escape Vanessa, staged a car accident, and started over, rather than face whatever she had planned for him. He was initially reluctant to speak with me, terrified that Vanessa would find him, but when I explained my situation, he agreed to provide a statement. His testimony was devastating. He described years of psychological abuse, of gaslighting so severe that he had begun to question his own sanity. Vanessa had isolated him from his family, controlled his finances, and when he tried to leave, she had threatened to destroy him, to tell everyone he was violent, unstable, dangerous. He believed she would have killed him eventually. He said she had the patience of a spider, waiting in her web for the perfect moment to strike. I gathered medical experts who reviewed my father's records and testified that his cognitive decline was consistent with over-medication, that the levels of certain drugs in his system during the months before his death were far higher than appropriate for his condition. One expert suggested that he might have been deliberately sedated to ensure his compliance when the new will was signed. I produced the journals, every page photographed and authenticated by a handwriting expert, who confirmed that the entries were written by my father over a span of 30 years. that they could not have been fabricated or altered. The judge read the passages aloud in court, my father's voice echoing through the chamber, speaking truth from beyond the grave. She asked me to fire David Chen today, one entry read. Said she found a better attorney, someone more modern, more efficient. But David has been my attorney for 20 years. He knew Catherine. He helped us write our wills together, holding hands at his desk, laughing about who would get the ugly lamp in the guest room. I cannot fire him. I cannot let her erase him too. Another entry, written in a shaking hand that spoke of confusion and fear. I don't know what's real anymore. Vanessa says I never kept journals, that I'm imagining things, that I'm confused. But I'm holding this journal in my hands. I can see my own handwriting on every page. I am not confused. I am not imagining. She is trying to make me doubt myself. Why would she do that? What does she want from me? And the final entry, written just 2 weeks before my father's death. Eleanor, if you find this, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for choosing silence over confrontation, for letting her push you away, for believing, even for a moment, that she had our family's interests at heart. I know now what she is, but I am too weak to fight her, too tired, too confused. The only thing I can do is hide these words and hope that someone, someday, finds them and understands. I love you, Eleanor. I love Tommy. I have always loved you. Whatever documents she produces after I'm gone, whatever she claims I signed, know that my true wishes are written here, in my own hand, with what remains of my own mind. Take care of each other. Take care of our history. Do not let her win. The courtroom was silent when those words were read. I saw tears on the faces of strangers, people who had never met my father, but who understood, through his words, exactly what he had suffered. And I saw Vanessa, sitting at the defendant's table, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. The judge's ruling was comprehensive and damning. He found that the October will was invalid due to lack of testamentary capacity, that there was substantial evidence of undue influence, and that Vanessa had engaged in a pattern of behavior designed to isolate and control my father for financial gain. He reinstated the previous will, the one my father had signed with David Chen, and ordered Vanessa to return all assets she had transferred or liquidated since my father's death. But the legal victory was only part of it. Because during the course of our investigation, Marcus and I had uncovered something far more serious than financial manipulation. We found the doctor. His name was Harold Simmons, and he was the physician Vanessa had found for my father after Dr. Patterson retired. He was not licensed in Massachusetts. His credentials, which Vanessa had shown my father to reassure him, were forged. His real name was Harold Reeves, and he had lost his medical license in Ohio 10 years earlier for overprescribing controlled substances to elderly patients. Marcus traced the payments Vanessa had made to Simmons, hidden in a web of shell companies and transfers, totaling over $50,000 over 3 years. In exchange for this money, Simmons had provided Vanessa with a steady supply of sedatives and cognitive suppressants, drugs that, when administered in the dosages she was giving my father, would cause exactly the symptoms he displayed: confusion, memory loss, compliance. She had been drugging him. For 3 years, she had been drugging my own father, slowly eroding his mind so that she could control him completely, so that he would sign whatever she put in front of him, so that he would believe her lies and forget his truth. When I understood the full scope of what she had done, I felt a rage so cold and complete that it frightened me. This was not just greed. This was cruelty. This was torture, extended over years, inflicted on a man who had never been anything but kind, who had trusted her, who had loved her in his confused and diminished way even as she destroyed him. I wanted justice, real justice. Not just the return of property and money, but consequences that matched the severity of what she had done. The police were initially hesitant to investigate. Elder abuse is notoriously difficult to prosecute, and Vanessa had covered her tracks carefully. But Marcus and I had built an airtight case, documented every payment, traced every prescription, interviewed every witness. We handed it to the district attorney on a silver platter, and even the most skeptical investigator could not deny what we had found. Harold Simmons was arrested first. He folded immediately, offering to testify against Vanessa in exchange for a reduced sentence. He told investigators everything: how Vanessa had approached him, how she had explained exactly what she needed, how she had coached him on the dosages required to keep my father confused but functional, how she had laughed about it sometimes, called my father her golden goose, and joked about plucking him. Vanessa was arrested on a Tuesday morning, almost exactly 1 year after my father's death. I was there to watch, standing across the street from the Newton house as officers led her out in handcuffs. She saw me and stopped, her eyes blazing with hatred. "You think you've won," she spat. "You think this is over, but you're just like him. Weak, sentimental, holding on to a past that doesn't matter. I'll be out in a year, and I'll find a way to make you pay for this." I said nothing. I just watched as they put her in the back of the police car and drove away. The trial was a media sensation. The narrative was irresistible. The cunning gold digger, the devoted daughter, the journals from beyond the grave. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, and true crime podcasts devoted entire episodes to dissecting every detail. Vanessa's previous victims came forward, emboldened by her arrest, and the picture they painted was of a serial predator who had spent decades targeting vulnerable men and systematically stripping them of their assets and their dignity. The prosecution presented evidence of elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. They introduced the testimony of Harold Simmons, who described in clinical detail how he had helped Vanessa incapacitate my father. They played recordings of phone calls between Vanessa and her previous victims, calls she had made from the Newton house while my father slept in the next room, bragging about her conquests and planning her next moves. And they read from my father's journals, page after page of his own words, documenting his growing awareness of what was happening to him and his desperate hope that someone would find the truth after he was gone. Vanessa's defense was that she had been a loving wife, that my father had been confused long before she met him, that the journals were fabrications created by a bitter daughter seeking revenge. But the jury did not believe her. How could they? The evidence was overwhelming, and Vanessa's own demeanor undercut her claims of innocence. She could not maintain the mask of the grieving widow under cross-examination. Her anger, her contempt, her cold calculation broke through again and again, revealing the truth of who she was. The verdict was guilty on all counts. Vanessa received 22 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 15. She would be nearly 70 when she was eligible for release, if she lived that long. Tommy and I were in the courtroom when the sentence was read. He gripped my hand so tightly that I thought he might break my fingers, but I did not pull away. We had both lost so much. Years of relationship with our father, stolen by Vanessa's manipulation. Memories that we would never get back. Conversations that we would never have. But we had also found something in this terrible journey. We had found each other again, brother and sister united by grief and determination and love. After the trial, we inherited the Newton house and the main property, just as our father had always intended. Tommy moved into the Newton house, unable to afford his own place and unwilling to leave the home where he had grown up. I helped him renovate it, removing every trace of Vanessa's cold redesign and restoring it to something closer to what our mother had loved. Warm colors, comfortable furniture, photographs on every surface. I returned to the main property for the first time in years, standing beneath the old oak tree where my mother's ashes were scattered. It was spring, and the lake was glittering in the afternoon sun, and I felt, for the first time since my father's death, something like peace. "I did it, Mom," I whispered, my words carried away by the wind. "I did it, Dad. She didn't win. She never won." I scattered my father's ashes there, beneath the same tree, so that he and my mother could be together again in the place they loved most. Tommy and I said prayers, shared memories, and cried together for everything we had lost and everything we had found. The money and property were restored to us, But the most valuable inheritance was not material. It was the journals, the record of my father's life, and thoughts and love, preserved despite Vanessa's best efforts to destroy them. I had them professionally bound and archived, and I donated copies to the university where he had taught, so that future students could understand who Richard Hartwell really was. Not a confused old man manipulated by a predator, but a loving father, a dedicated scholar, and a man who had found a way to speak truth even when he could no longer speak for himself. Tommy is doing better now. He has started painting again, finding in art the expression he could not access during the years of Vanessa's control. His work is haunting and beautiful, full of shadows and light, and he has begun to show in local galleries. He still struggles with the guilt of not seeing what was happening sooner, of not fighting harder for our father, but I remind him that Vanessa was a master manipulator, that she had deceived far more worldly people than a young artist still finding his way. Marcus remains my closest friend. He was there through every court date, every sleepless night, every moment when I doubted myself and wondered if I was fighting a battle I could not win. He never wavered, never suggested I give up, never let me forget why I was fighting. When the trial was over and Vanessa was sentenced, he took me to dinner at a small Italian restaurant in the North End, and we raised a glass to my father's memory. "He would be proud of you," Marcus said. "You did exactly what he asked. You took care of your brother. You took care of your history. You did not let her win." I think about that often. I think about my father, sitting in his study with his journal open before him, writing words he hoped would be found someday. He knew he was losing the battle. He knew Vanessa was winning, moment by moment, pill by pill, but he did not give up entirely. He found a way to preserve his truth, to leave a map for anyone who cared enough to follow it. I followed it. And because I did, because I was patient and careful and methodical, because I refused to let anger cloud my judgment or grief derail my purpose, Vanessa is spending the rest of her useful years behind bars, and my father's legacy remains intact. There are still hard days. There are still moments when I am overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Vanessa took from us. Not just money or property, but time, relationship, the chance to say goodbye to my father when he was still himself. I will never get those years back. I will never have the conversations I should have had, the holidays I should have spent with him, the quiet evenings sitting together in his study, discussing books and life and love. But I have his journals, I have his words, and in those words, I have him, the real him, preserved forever. The main cabin has become a retreat for me now, a place I visit whenever the world becomes too heavy. I sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the lake, and I feel my parents' presence in the wind, in the water, in the ancient trees that have watched over our family for generations. I have made peace with the past as much as anyone can make peace with such a history, and I have learned that revenge, true revenge, is not about destruction. It is about preservation. It is about refusing to let the destroyers win. Vanessa tried to erase my father's past. She tried to remove every trace of who he was, what he valued, whom he loved. She nearly succeeded. But in the end, his own words defeated her. His diary told a different story, a true story, and that truth was stronger than all her lies. I speak at conferences now, sometimes, about elder abuse and financial exploitation. I tell my father's story, and I watch people in the audience recognize elements of their own experiences. I have helped dozens of families identify the warning signs of predatory relationships, and I have provided guidance to those already trapped in them. I cannot bring my father back, but I can honor his memory by protecting others from suffering as he did. Tommy and I talk about our parents often, sharing memories, laughing at old jokes, crying sometimes over what might have been. We have become close in a way we never were as children, bonded by trauma and survival and the hard work of rebuilding. He is my family, my truest family, and I am grateful for him every day. And when I think about Vanessa sitting in her prison cell, stripped of everything she stole, I do not feel triumph. I feel something quieter, something more complex. I feel relief that she cannot hurt anyone else. I feel sorrow for the man she never truly loved. And I feel gratitude, deep and abiding gratitude, for a father who knew, even in his darkest moments, that his children would find the truth and fight for it. My father's diary told a different story, and that story saved us all. The seasons have continued to turn since Vanessa's conviction. 3 winters have passed, 3 springs, 3 summers where the lake in Maine has glittered beneath skies my parents once shared. I visit the cabin as often as I can now, weekends when work allows, longer stretches during the holidays. I have learned to find comfort there rather than grief, to feel my parents' presence as a blessing rather than a loss. Tommy visited last autumn, the first time he had been to Maine since before our mother died. He stood beneath the oak tree for a long time, silent, tears streaming down his face, and then he began to paint. He set up his easel right there on the shore and worked until the sun went down, capturing something I could not name but immediately recognized. The essence of our family, the love that persisted despite everything Vanessa tried to destroy. He gave me that painting for my birthday. It hangs in my apartment now, across from my bed, so it is the first thing I see every morning and the last thing I see every night. It reminds me of why I fought, why I endured, why I refused to let Vanessa win. I received a letter from the prison last month. Vanessa's handwriting, cramped and angry, filling 3 pages with accusations and threats. She blames me for everything, of course. She claims she was innocent, that I fabricated evidence, that the justice system failed her. She promises that when she gets out, she will make me regret what I did to her. I read the letter once and then burned it. I do not give her power over my thoughts. I do not allow her to occupy space in my mind that belongs to people I love. She is exactly where she deserves to be, and no amount of bitter letters will change that. The foundation I established in my father's name continues to grow. We provide legal assistance to families dealing with elder abuse, helping them navigate the complex court system and gather the evidence they need to protect their loved ones. We have helped over 200 families in the past 2 years, and that number grows every month. My father would have loved this, would have loved knowing that his suffering led to something meaningful, something that helps others. I speak at universities now, law schools and medical schools, teaching future professionals to recognize the signs of exploitation. I tell my father's story, every painful detail, and I watch the audience absorb it. Some of them will become prosecutors who take elder abuse cases seriously. Some will become doctors who question unexpected medication changes. Some will become social workers who trust their instincts when something seems wrong. Every one of them carries a piece of my father's story forward, making the world a little bit safer for vulnerable people. Marcus proposed to me last spring. He got down on one knee by the lake in Maine, in the same spot where my parents had scattered their dreams decades ago. I said yes without hesitation, because I have learned that life is short and uncertain, and love, real love, is the only thing worth holding on to. We are planning a summer wedding, small and intimate, just family and close friends. Tommy will walk me down the aisle, filling in for our father, carrying his memory forward into this new chapter of our lives. I will wear my mother's wedding dress, the one I rescued from Vanessa's attempts to discard it, carefully restored and altered to fit. And in my bouquet, tucked among the flowers, I will carry a single page from my father's journal, the entry where he wrote about falling in love with my mother, about knowing from the first moment he saw her that she was the one he wanted to spend his life with. His words will be with me as I begin my own marriage, his blessing reaching across the years. Vanessa tried to erase my father's past. She tried to destroy his memory, his legacy, his love. She nearly succeeded. She came so close to winning that I sometimes wake in the night, cold with the memory of how close she came. If I had not found those journals, if my father had not hidden them, if Vanessa had been a little more thorough in her destruction, she would have walked away with everything. My father would be forgotten, his story rewritten by a woman who never loved him, and Tommy and I would have been left with nothing but grief and confusion. But she did not win. She underestimated my father, thinking he was too old, too confused, too defeated to fight back. She underestimated me, thinking I was just a bitter daughter too emotional to see clearly. And she underestimated the power of truth, the stubborn persistence of words on paper, the way love leaves traces that cannot be entirely erased. My father's diary told a different story. His own words, written in his own hand, over 30 years of his life, preserved against all odds. And those words became the weapon that defeated her, the evidence that exposed her, the legacy that outlasted her attempts to destroy it. I am not the same person I was 7 years ago, when Vanessa first entered our lives. I have been forged in the fire of betrayal and loss, hardened by the work of investigation and litigation, tempered by the slow process of healing. I am stronger now, more certain of my own judgment, more willing to trust my instincts. I have learned that the people who seem most trustworthy are sometimes the most dangerous, and that the people who love you may not always be able to protect you from those who don't. But I have also learned that love endures. It survives death and distance and the most determined attempts to destroy it. My parents loved each other, and that love lives on in me, in Tommy, in the foundation we built, in the cabin by the lake where their ashes rest together. Vanessa tried to kill that love, but she failed. She will always fail. Because love is stronger than greed, and truth is stronger than lies, and the memory of good people cannot be erased by bad ones. My father's story is my story now. I carry it with me everywhere I go, a reminder of what I have lost and what I have saved. And when people ask me how I found the strength to fight Vanessa for so many years, how I kept going when the odds seemed impossible, I tell them about the diaries. I tell them about a man who knew he was losing, but refused to give up entirely, who hid his truth where his daughter would eventually find it, who trusted that love would win in the end. He was right to trust, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure his trust was not misplaced. The sun is setting over the lake now, painting the water in shades of gold and rose. I'm sitting on the porch of the cabin, a cup of tea cooling in my hands, watching the day end. Marcus is inside, preparing dinner, and I can hear him humming to himself, happy and at peace. Tommy is driving up tomorrow, bringing his latest paintings to show us. Everything is not perfect. It never will be. There are scars that will never fully heal, absences that will never be filled, but there is also beauty, and love, and hope. There is the knowledge that I did everything I could, that I honored my father's memory, that I protected our family's legacy. And there is this moment, this quiet evening, this sense that despite everything Vanessa took from us, the most important things remain. My stepmother tried to erase my father's past, but his diary told a different story. And that story, his story, our story, continues. It will continue long after I am gone, passed down through generations, a testament to the power of truth and the resilience of love. Vanessa sits in her cell, surrounded by concrete and regret, and I sit here, surrounded by the ghosts of my parents and the promise of my future, watching the sun go down over the lake they loved. She lost. She will always have lost. And my father, in the end, won. That is the story his diary told. That is the story I am still telling. And it is the story that will be told for generations to come, long after all of us are gone, long after Vanessa's name is forgotten, long after the world has moved on to other tragedies and other triumphs. My father's words endure, his love endures, his legacy endures, and that is the only revenge that ever mattered.